Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're tracing the history of human consciousness, and we're going all the way from ancient philosophy, straight through the clinking mechanical gears of early computers, right up to modern algorithms. We are tackling a massive, honestly mind-bending, unsolved problem. How does a mind actually exist in a physical world of matter?
I mean, think about it. Are you a ghost driving a meat skeleton, or are you just a biological computer? It's a pretty jarring question, right? But this single mystery has absolutely baffled humanity for millennia, sitting right at the chaotic intersection of philosophy, biology, and algorithms. How does a mind, your mind, actually arise? Like, when you feel pain, only you feel it. It's completely private, unlike a physical object anyone can just observe. Why is that? To answer that, we've got to look back at how our ancestors tried to decode reality itself.
Okay, let's dive into this. In the Republic, Plato illustrated our total reliance on biological senses through his famous allegory of the cave. He argued that we're basically like prisoners confusing shadows on a wall for actual reality. If you're thinking this sounds exactly like the pop culture concept of the Matrix, you've hit the nail on the head. These ancient ideas about false realities still haunt us today. To discover the true nature of the world, Plato said we had to break free and rely entirely on pure rational thought. And this idea led straight to what we call the problem of the mind. You see, Plato created a strict dualism. He split reality into two completely different realms, a changing, perishing physical world and an unchanging eternal world. This eternal realm exists totally outside of time and space, grasping concepts like pure math and reason. Plato firmly believed you have an immortal, immaterial soul, your intellect basically, that belongs to this eternal world, but happens to be trapped inside your physical body. But this left a massive, glaring mystery for us. How on earth do two totally different worlds actually interact?
Fast forward to the Renaissance. Between the 13th and 16th centuries, these incredibly complex, spring-driven clock mechanisms began popping up everywhere. And this wasn't just a fun technological revolution. It provided a brand new, concrete metaphor for human biology. Suddenly, philosophers had a physical model for complex, moving systems that didn't rely on magic or unseen forces. It was just cogs, pistons, and cams doing the work.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how inventors took this mechanical metaphor to absolute extremes. Take this bizarre historical automaton, the Clockwork monk, built around 1560. This intricate machine could actually walk around, strike its chest, and literally roll its eyes. Watching a machine mimic human behavior so closely, that inspired philosophers to start viewing our biological bodies as literal machines. It was a complete paradigm shift.
Naturally, this sparked a massive philosophical clash. On one side, you had René Descartes championing classical dualism. He essentially argued that the non-physical mind pilots the mechanical body, kind of like someone playing a video game. But centuries later, Gilbert Ryle countered this with a modern behavioral view, basically arguing that this non-physical mind is a complete and utter illusion.
In fact, Ryle famously called Descartes' theory the myth of the ghost in the machine. Ryle totally rejected Cartesian dualism. He argued that mental processes aren't happening in some isolated magical spirit realm. No, they're just intelligent acts governed by regular physical laws and principles of reasoning. Essentially, modern philosophy started to say, hey, there is no actual separation between mind and matter. The ghost isn't real. There is only the machine.
And to cement that idea, inventors just kept pushing the boundaries. Consider Jacques de Vaucanson's digesting duck from 1739. This was an automaton that supposedly ate grain and, well, pooped it out. No, actually, scratch that. It was a fake. It was a clever illusion that used a secret container of pre-stored feces, but the intent behind it was dead serious. It further cemented the growing metaphor that biological bodies are simply elaborate plumbing and gear systems processing inputs into outputs.
So the crucial point is that this mechanical metaphor evolved seamlessly into the modern era through what we call computationalism. This is the theory that the human mind is essentially an information processing system, and that our cognition and consciousness are literally just a form of computation. It assumes the mind is basically software running on the brain's wet biological hardware. Under this view, even your most subjective experiences, like the crisp taste of an apple or the redness of a sunset, are just computational outputs. But if computationalism is actually true, it forces us to ask a pretty terrifying question. If the brain is just a computer, is free will an illusion? The American philosopher Dennett argues exactly this. He proposes that we humans are just machines, that our inner self-sense, our consciousness, and the choices we make might just be the inevitable outputs of deterministic computation. In this view, free will simply doesn't exist.
We just feel like it does because we limit our options based on context. But ultimately, our hardware is just blindly running its inevitable programming. Let's move to and see how this builds into physical technology. Back in the 19th century, Charles Babbage designed the difference engine to literally mechanize human thought and calculation. It was designed to automatically compute and print mathematical tables. Now, he couldn't actually build it during his lifetime because he lacked standardized parts like screws, but it took the mind-as-machine metaphor to the next literal level. He was quite literally trying to build the physical hardware to run the software of human thought.
Which brings us to Section 2, the dawn of algorithms, from clay to code. We're shifting gears here to explore the actual software that runs our computers, and potentially our brains.
Because long before we had silicon chips, we were writing computational code on literal clay. Around 5000 BC, the Sumerians in Mesopotamia outgrew human memory for their trade routes, so they created writing on clay tablets, literally the first external storage of data. By 1800 BC, Babylonians were using algorithms for the Pythagorean theorem, which is wild because that's 1,000 years before Pythagoras was even born. And by 300 BC, at the Great Library of Alexandria, mathematicians like Euclid were formalizing algorithms that we literally still use in computer science today.
And this brilliantly illustrates what an algorithm fundamentally is, to demystify how they operate: a strict, step-by-step set of rules. Using Euclid's method for finding the greatest common divisor with 18 and 12, it's so simple. You just input the numbers, subtract the smaller from the larger, replace the larger with the result, and repeat until the numbers are equal. It's a completely mindless, mechanical process, but it produces an intelligent result.
Around that exact same time, the director of the Library of Alexandria, Eratosthenes, invented this brilliant, systematic algorithm for hunting prime numbers. By simply listing numbers out and systematically crossing out multiples, you inevitably isolate the primes. What this shows us is that complex, deterministic computational rules aren't some modern Silicon Valley invention. They have governed human problem-solving for well over 2 millennia.
Which brings us right back to our main philosophical debate. If the universe runs on strict rules, and if our brains are basically just running complex algorithms based on inputs and previous states, we crash right into incompatibilism. This is the philosophical stance that a deterministic universe logically cannot coexist with free will. If all physical events are caused by previous algorithmic events, then every single choice you've ever made was just the only possible output of your biological software. There's no ghost, just the code.
So, what does this all mean for us? I'll leave you with this final, provocative thought to wrap up the entire automaton's journey. Did you actually choose to watch this explainer? Or was it just deterministic code executing in your biological hardware? Are you the ghost, or are you the machine? As we've seen today, from Plato's cave to pooping mechanical ducks, all the way to Euclid's clay algorithms, the answer might just deeply change how you view your entire conscious reality. Thanks for joining me on this journey today, and keep questioning the code.